This is one of the Gospels that really takes some exegesis, is trying to understand why it was written like this and what's going on. Because sometimes we had a very wrong interpretation of this particular Gospel. Now, what are we to think of with the behavior of Jesus? Sometimes you'll find somebody say, Jesus was just upset and he was tired and he just like that. Well, that's not the Jesus that I know. Well, he just got in the snit because this Canaanite woman. No, Jesus doesn't do things like that. There's a specific reason why the gospel is written as it is, and the message of that. Now, Jesus is way up in the north part. Actually, what we wouldn't call it even the Holy Land. It's even further north than that, Tyre and Sidon. So it was a very pagan, very non-Jewish, non-Israelite area. There were very, very few Jews in that area because they were always at war. And especially the Canaanites. The Canaanites were a very, very fierce group of people. And if you go back to the 12th chapter of the book of Wisdom, you can just a whole chronicle of the kinds of crimes and sins that they were doing. I mean, offering their children to pagan gods. And it goes on and on. And they were just a thorn in the sides of the Israelites. So there was a lot of animosity between the Israelites and the Canaanites. So interesting if you go to that 12th chapter of the book of Wisdom. But it's really interesting when she comes up to Jesus. She says, first of all, she has three things against her. First of all, she's a woman. And in those days, women did not talk to men in public. It was not in the culture. Secondly, she's a Canaanite, which puts everybody on edge. And she wants something. And that's as she comes up to Jesus. And have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. That's important. First of all, there were many Israelites that would not say to Jesus, Lord, Son of David. And here is a pagan giving him honorific words. Lord, Son of David. Obviously, she had some kind of understanding or knowledge of what the Israelites would say. But here she goes into this beautiful addressing Jesus Christ. And when you read it in the Greek, Esla asun amet kyrie. Anybody know where we get some of that? Anybody know that? You guys go to church? I'll give you a hint. Advent and Lent. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. That's Greek. That's not Latin. It's Greek. Have mercy on me, Lord. And here, that's how she's addressing Jesus. And that's how the Greek translations of the early languages are used in the Bible. So he's there, but he doesn't respond. He doesn't respond. Now, my daughter is a demonic spirit in her. Now, if somebody came to you and said, my son, my daughter is really sick, something's really wrong, will you please help me? how many of you would just say nothing? Of course we wouldn't. We might say, well, I don't know how to help. I can't help. We would say something back. Jesus doesn't say anything. He doesn't dismiss her. He just doesn't answer. A very interesting dynamic there. And I get the sense that Jesus is waiting for something more. And of course, the disciples, get rid of her. I mean, she's just calling after us, and she's a nuisance. And he's not going to do that. He does not do that. And so finally he says, I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. See, there's kind of a right procedure that God set up. One of the things that was expected of the Mashiach was to gather all the 12 tribes again, to bring them into a community of the 12 tribes. That was what that we expected. If you're the Messiah, that's what you're going to do. So God said, this is the way I want it done. Jesus, I came to all of those first. Well, does that mean it's the Israelites and all the rest of us were out of luck? Of course not. Of course not. God's plan was to renew and reunite the tribes for the sake of the rest of the nations of the world. It wasn't just to have a singularity, but who would go out to the world. And then we have that, it is not good to take the food for the children and throw it to the dogs. Now that sounds very, very harsh. And I would never, please don't, ever do this to somebody. But Jesus is kind of setting up what's happening. In this case, the word dogs means all those pagans, those who do not know God, who are estranged from God. That's what he's talking about there. He's not trying to put somebody just in a category of animals. But dogs do not know about the throne of the kingdom of God. And so that's what that word represents, not a bad language. And of course, she comes back, well, look at, even the dogs eat the scraps off the master's table. And Jesus is just looks at, and just, your faith is wonderful. Your faith is great. Now that's a wonderful thing. Jesus recognizes that. And of course, then the daughter is healed. It's interesting in the scriptures. When Jesus comes, he does not send people into the world. He sends them sometimes to the towns of Israel, but not to the rest of the world. That does not happen until after the ascension of Jesus. Then he says, go to all the nations. That's the process that God set in place. Now, to think of it in a little bit different way, think about walls and bridges. Walls are very important because the walls define us. A wall defines things. It puts things in the right point of life. And so we need to have walls. It's how we define ourselves. I am me, I'm not you. That's a wall. And there's many of them like that. And we need to build them up to be strong. Because if we don't do that, we just become nobody. I know, it's harder to be nothing. Thank you. Yeah, I paid him to do that, okay? But that's what happens when we don't have the walls. The other side of the coin is we also have to have bridges. As Jesus built a bridge between the rule of God, the plan of God, and he goes out and he encounters the culture. And it's because of his walls that he can bring that mercy to the culture. We have to do that. We have to build bridges. Now, if all you do is go out and experience the world, you're going to end up with nothing. It's just going to be mush. And we need to have the walls to keep our identity, but yet the mercy to go out and encounter the culture. That's what we have to do. And that's those lessons we take from this particular gospel. So after Mass, we have to be ready to go out. And two things to remember. If our walls are too high and too rigid, we will not be able to communicate the message of God. If we go into the world on a loosey-goosey kind of thing, we will not be able to teach the gospel. We need both of them. And one of the great things we have with the Eucharist, God gives us the power in the Eucharist to have the walls and to build the bridges. We're called to that for the sake of the world. We are not baptized Catholics just for ourselves. We are baptized Catholics for the world, this world. To take those walls of faith and truth and virtue and encounter a culture that doesn't want to be encountered. But we have to go out to all the nations. That was the last command that Jesus gave his disciples. It's the first command for us.